It is Sunday, the 13th of November, 2016. I'm in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, engaged in my alternative spiritual practice of protesting against Unitarian Universalist injustices, abuses, and hypocrisy. And we're looking at the wayside pulpit of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, the Unitarian Church of Montreal's church sign. And by that, I don't mean the church sign that identifies the church, which is this one here, but what they call the wayside pulpit, what I call the wayward pulpit, because it's so often completely bullshit. And here we have the mission statement of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, the vague, wishy-washy, almost meaningless mission statement of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. And why do I say it's meaningless or almost meaningless? Well, because it is so vague that it can be interpreted in two diametrically opposed ways. You know, it says our spiritual community welcomes, nurtures, inspires, challenges. Together we take action in the world. But it says nothing about the nature of those actions in the world that Montreal Unitarians take together. It says nothing about what they welcome. It says nothing about what they nurture. It says nothing about what they inspire. And it says nothing about what they challenge. And this sign, obviously it's meant to be interpreted in a positive light, but it can be interpreted in a very negative light. It can be interpreted as, you know, our spiritual community welcomes anti-religious bigots to be minister of our church. Our spiritual community welcomes the Unitarian Universalist Association's immoral, unethical, borderline criminal, and quite frankly batshit crazy misuse of Canada's blasphemy law in Bill Cosby-style legal bullying that seeks to cover up and deny such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape committed by certain Unitarian Universalist ministers. Our spiritual community nurtures abusive Unitarian Universalist clergy and abusive church members. Our spiritual community inspires some of our members to physically assault people and so on. And as far as challenges goes, well, all too often the spiritual community known as the Unitarian Church of Montreal challenges things that it shouldn't be challenging. It challenges things that it should be agreeing with. So just pure hypocrisy, And yes, together we take action in the world. Well, one of the actions that Montreal Unitarians take in the world, besides stealing my picket signs, beside falsely accusing me of crimes and so on, is that they aid and abet Unitarian Universalists' cover-up and denial of child sex abuse. And they do so by erasing chalk slogans like this that say Unitarians cover up and deny child sex abuse. So here I am, I'm protesting against the fact that Unitarian Universalists do in fact cover up and deny child sex abuse committed by Unitarian Universalist ministers and so on. And the action in the world that the Unitarian Church of Montreal and its leaders and members take in response to that protest is not to say, oh, this is outrageous and we need to deal with this and we have to fix this problem. No, their action in the world is to that's interesting, looks like the person was videoing me as I went by. Their action in the world is to hide this. They're covering up the cover-up. And in covering up the cover-up, they cover up the child sex abuse itself. When they erase my chalk slogan, they make it impossible for people to be aware of the cover-up of the child sex abuse and by extension the child sex abuse itself. So that is just the oh my god, yeah. So this woman sees my picket sign and chalk slogan, gives me a little thumbs up, says oh my god, and that's the appropriate response, Montreal Unitarians themselves should say, oh my God, you know, did the Unitarian Universalist Association really misuse Canada's blasphemy law and Bill Cosby-style legal bullying intended to cover up and deny such despicable crimes, pedophilia and rape? You know, maybe we should speak out against that. Maybe we should express our dismay and our horror and our disgust and so on, rather than just try to hide the fact that the Unitarian Universalist Association covers up and denies pedophilia and rape. So what with all these picket signs blowing away in the wind, it's a bit gusty today, and in that see, like I put it up and it's already down again, so it's getting moderately annoying. I think I'm just going to stop displaying the freestanding picket signs because it's just too bothersome having to set them up again. So I'll just display a picket sign, one in each hand. Okay, so let's put the unsafe sect picket sign down here so it's visible. And we'll display the picket sign that says Unitarian Universalists misuse blasphemy law to cover up and deny pedophilia and rape. So it's two picket signs that go together to make that statement. And it's a bit long for cars to read as they go by, but I think they can get the gist of it. And people are certainly looking at the signs. Of course, it's a lot easier to read my unsafe sect picket sign, which somehow managed to blow down, even though it's got the weight of two other picket signs behind it to keep it against a tree. So this picket sign predates by more than a decade the Unitarian Universalist Association's false blasphemous libel accusation against me. It was one of the earliest picket signs that I displayed in my protest. It wasn't the absolute first picket signs. The first picket signs, the first few months, were actually pretty soft. You know, they weren't really hitting too hard because, you know, I was seeking resolution. I didn't want to, like, you know, totally humiliate the church. I just wanted them to deal responsibly with the issues that they hadn't dealt responsibly with. So my initial picket signs weren't quite as in your face as that. But after a while, you know, when the church just totally refused to respond in responsibility to what is said on my picket signs and what I was protesting against, and they had lots of letters to read too prior to my protest, and even after it began, I continued to distribute letters every now and then. You know, so they knew what the issues were. They knew what they needed to deal with, but they chose not to. So after a while, I, you know, increased the hard-hittingness of the picket signs, as it were. And one of the picket signs said "unsafe sect," and it had a question mark after it. So it was posing it as a question. You know, is this an unsafe sect? Well, you might have noticed that the current version no longer has a question mark, and that is because it's no longer a question that Unitarian Universalism is unsafe in various ways, but certainly unsafe for people who... Thank you. So, getting back to things, Unitarian Universalism is unsafe in terms of how it responds to clergy misconduct of all kinds. In fact, it almost dismisses completely non-sexual misconduct. It rarely does anything at all about non-sexual clergy misconduct, except, of course, for when a Unitarian Universalist minister plagiarizes the sermons of his fellow Unitarian Universalist ministers. Oh, well, then there's a problem, you know. Then the guy is severely punished. But you know, if you complain about a Unitarian Universalist minister labeling you psychotic because you're claiming a religious experience and labeling an interreligious event you had promoted and celebrated as a cult, well then, that's within the appropriate guidelines of ministerial leadership, yada, yada, yada. Nothing wrong with that. If you complain about a Unitarian Universalist minister fantasizing about annually impaling a Republican state senator on the Statue of Liberty's torch, fantasizing about kicking people in the teeth, and actually kicking one of the children of her congregants, and other behavior that is, not just violent fantasies, but actual violence, well, then that's outside of a role as a minister. They always find some excuse not to do anything, And I should add that Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein's sodomy fantasy, which imagined Senator Bill Napoli anally impaled on the Statue of Liberty's torch, could be construed as sexual harassment. I did not do so. I just considered it to be, unprofessional and verbally and psychologically abusive and so on. I did not try to construe it as sexual harassment of Senator Bill Napoli. But, when in June of 2012, the Unitarian Universalist Association accused me of, and this is an exact quote from the legal letter, threatening and defamatory conduct amounting to sexual harassment of women Unitarian Universalist ministers for criticizing Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein's sodomy fantasy. In other words, they were accusing me of sexual harassment of Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein, also known as Peace Bang, for criticizing what could be properly described as her own threatening and defamatory conduct amounting to sexual harassment of, not to mention death threats against Senator Bill Napoli. Now, death threats is maybe taken a little too far. It wasn't an actual threat. I mean, it was so ludicrous and over the top that, basically physically impossible to actually do kind of thing, that it couldn't really, realistically be perceived as a threat against his safety. But it was threatening, and it was certainly wishing physical harm on Senator Bill Napoli, wishing anal rape on Senator Bill Napoli with a very large blunt object, with some pointy bits actually, now that I think about it. So, Reverend Victoria Weinstein's sodomy fantasy could be considered a revenge porn, could be considered a rape fantasy, an anal rape fantasy. And yet, when I complained about this and other unbecoming conduct on the part of Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein, well, the Unitarian Universalist Association, via their mouthpieces, Reverend Dr. Tracy Robinson Harris and Reverend Beth Miller, decided, that Peace Bang's behavior was outside of her role as a minister. In other words, it wasn't their problem. It wasn't part of her ministry, so therefore they didn't have to do anything about it, which is ridiculous. Her Peace Bang blog, the intro to the blog made it very clear that she was a Unitarian Universalist minister. She was blogging pseudonymously, so her actual name wasn't known. Basically, she went as Peace Bang. But she clearly identified herself as a minister of a small New England Unitarian Universalist church and so on. So she was blogging as a Unitarian Universalist minister and blogging about ministry issues and so on. So I really don't see how the Unitarian Universalist Association can pretend, as it did, that Reverend Weinstein's Peace Bang blog was totally separate from her role as a minister. And actually since then, since that complaint, I believe that the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association has actually changed its guidelines so that if I made the same complaint today, it'd be hard for the UUA to say it wasn't part of her ministry, wasn't part of her professional conduct as a minister. But like I said, they find any excuse. They're their whole attitude to clergy misconduct complaints, you know, a good number of them anyway, is just to find some excuse for doing nothing, some excuse for just letting the minister get away with whatever they did, including sexual misconduct. So that's it. You know, Unitarian Universalist ministers have made off with congregants' wives with zero consequences in terms of the Unitarian Universalist Association. Unitarian Universalist ministers have, you know, had affairs with congregants, and, you know, basically, you know, to quote another person, you know, use their congregations as harems with little or no consequence from the Unitarian Universalist Association. Unitarian Universalist ministers have been charged, tried, and convicted of exposing themselves in public and thus becoming registered sex offenders, and to the best of my knowledge, not only not facing any accountability, but being part of the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, which is, you know, disciplinary, or in quotation marks, disciplinary body. I mean, there's so little discipline actually practiced that to consider the Ministerial Fellowship Committee to be a disciplinary body is just ludicrous. You know, I think the accent is on fellowship more than anything else, which is why I like to, you know, underline the word fellowship between ministerial and committee. Anyway, I think we're just going to wrap up this protest. It's past 11 o'clock now. I do have other things I can do today. It's been quite an enjoyable protest, and we'll just let the cars see the signs here. So, see how we're doing time-wise. Okay, so we're just about done. So yeah, we're done. This is the last reel, unless something happens.